first speaker. Her name is Victoria Jones. She is a former dentist. She got into Bitcoin, she wrote a book, and it's called Truth Decay, How Bitcoin Fixes This, which I think is quite neat for an ex-dentist. So without further ado, what I'm hoping is you'll give her a round of applause, because I know what it's like to go on a stage and nobody claps. Make her feel welcome, Victoria Jones.
Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you for being here. You know, early in the morning to make the effort to come and see the first speaker can often be a pretty tough task, so I really appreciate you making the effort to turn up this morning. So what can I say? Avon family have done a fantastic job of giving us this opportunity to get together, and a great way to entertain the kids at the same time, so well done to them. Before I begin, can I just have a show of hands? Who here is completely new to Bitcoin, maybe say in the last year or so? What? Okay. How are you enjoying the ride? Bumpy, isn't it? But trust me, it's going to be worth it. So Bitcoin is quite an involved topic. There are many aspects that you need to be quite proficient in order to understand it properly. And you can see just from today's schedule, you know, just how varied the topics can be. Now, my particular focus in my talk today is on the economic side of Bitcoin, and what I want to do is talk to you about Bitcoin as a potential new form of money. Now, many people are attracted into the Bitcoin space because they've heard of the fantastic returns that people have experienced as a result of being part of Bitcoin, and there are some really good reasons for this. And so my aim today in the 30 to 45 minutes I've got available is to give you a taste of what some of those reasons are, so that you've got a bit more of a sound foundation to understand what it is you've got involved with. Does that sound good? Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So, before I start, my name is Victoria Jones. I'm the author of the book Truth Decay, How Bitcoin Fixes This. I authored the book in 2019 and then published it in March 2020, which was really annoying from a marketing perspective. However, it was published then, and whether or not my book had anything to do with the subsequent rise of the price of Bitcoin, I would like to take some credit for it, but to be fair, it was probably more Michael Saylor than it was my book. Nevertheless, it has been featured on Book Authority's best 100 Bitcoin books of all time. I think the highest ranking I saw it reach was number 23, so I was quite proud of that, considering it was my first book. It just goes to show that it has been getting noticed. I have got some with me, and people are going to have the opportunity to get a signed copy if they want to. I'll be there until 1 o'clock this afternoon, so sitting on the desk just at the back, so if you're interested in that, by all means, please come and see me about it. Now, the premise of the book is it basically tells the story of how I became interested in Bitcoin. You know, for the 20 years of my dental career, one of the biggest issues I had to grapple with was the differences between NHS and private dentistry. And believe it or not, that actually taught me an awful lot about you know, what's going on in the political sphere, how that relates to money, and specifically human emotions surrounding money. Very, very interesting. And then, of course, in an effort to progress my career in the way I wanted, I set up my own business around the time of the financial crisis, and that also encouraged me to do a further dive into what was going on in the financial system as well. For about a year in 2017, I was encouraging people to use Bitcoin to pay for their services. And by the middle of 2017, I realized, as I learned more about Bitcoin, I realized what a fabulous technology this was, and actually I wanted to spend much more time in this space than what I was originally doing. So I sold my business in 2017 and finished working as a dentist just last year. Okay, so coming back to the topic of today's talk, what is money? So whenever I start to investigate a new subject, I often find that the best place to start is to look at definitions, because actually definitions can be very interesting. Sometimes what you think the definition of a word is not actually what it is, and it's only by looking for the definition that you start to discover it. And what tends to happen when you start to look into the subject of money is you're overwhelmed with all of these other words that you then have to search for the definition for. And it becomes a veritable minefield. It's almost as if someone wanted us to find it confusing and give up at the first hurdle. However, if you do a deep dive and you really get down to what the nuggets of money is really all about, ultimately what it comes down to is trade. You know, it's about the means that we pay each other for our services, what economists call a medium of exchange. Now, considering Bitcoin, you know, a lot of people refer to Bitcoin as digital gold, and there are good reasons for that. You know, it's scarcity, only 21 million will ever be created, and all of the other features you're going to be learning about today. But ultimately, you know, when you do a trade, you've got a relationship between a buyer and a seller. And, you know, as Bitcoin is a form of digital gold, I decided that I wanted to go back and look at some of the early economists and what they had to say about the economy when they were actually dealing with gold, because that could maybe give us some ideas as to where this would take us in the future. And so the father of economics is a man known as Adam Smith, and he was one of the first people to really do a deep dive into what was actually going on when people bought and sold from each other. And one of the key characteristics that he said was the most important for a trade is that, you know, each individual involved in the trade needed to be able to possess private property. You know, in order to buy something, you needed private property that you could then transfer to the other person in order to secure the trade. It was also important that the trade was voluntary, and it also needed to be honest. You know, if you bought something from someone with a chicken, for example, and the next day the chicken died, okay, you might be able to eat it for dinner that night, depending on what the chicken died of, but you certainly wouldn't be able to hold on to it to produce eggs for you, and you certainly wouldn't be able to use it to trade with someone else in the future. And so, you know, that would mean that that trade was rather disappointing. And, you know, so this is how people build their reputation in the business environment. You know, the honesty of the trade is incredibly important. And Adam Smith recognized that, you know, human beings are wired to reward others that are able to help them solve a problem. And, you know, human beings are brilliantly set up to help solve problems because we are inherently creative. And so, you know, this kind of trading was extremely satisfying, and when anything started to interfere with that, it made life very difficult. Now, when Adam Smith was around in the 1770s, they were trading with silver coins, and you still get many people who suggest that if you know, our current world was to go into hyperinflation, maybe gold and silver is what we gravitate towards. And so this is an example of the silver coins, a silver coin from 1770. And you can see here the brown where the copper is already starting to show through, because even in 1770, the currency was starting to be debased. You know, the British pound was only, at this time, was only a third silver. The Scottish pound was 1/36 silver. And in France, the French pound and penny was 1/66 silver. Now this is actually a really interesting fact, because of course this was just 13 years before the French Revolution. And not many people realise that actually a key reason for the French Revolution was the fact that the French currency had been completely debased. Just before the French Revolution, you know, the powers that be in France had decided to revalue all the assets of the country and issue paper notes against that property, and this was going to be the currency that they used in the future. Now, the people in the city who knew what was going on made an absolute mint because they were able to take advantage of the situation, but the poor people in the countryside were completely impoverished to such an extent that some of them are even now characterised in our modern artistry, such as the innkeeper from Les Miserables. And so these are important details from my history that not many people are aware of, and I think it's really important that they are made aware of it. So honest trade is a key feature in ensuring that a nation is prosperous. You know, Adam Smith was quite keen to, you know, state that, you know, individuals that are able to trade well with each other. They're industrious, they're hardworking. You know, this kind of environment encourages people who are honest and trustworthy, because of course the moment they aren't trustworthy, it damages their reputation and their ability to trade in the future. And so, and you know, he was also very complimentary of the banks, you know, creating paper money, because he argued that it was the increased flow of currency in the economy that helped to make the nation prosperous. But he also had a very interesting observation, that it was not by gold or by silver, but by labour, that all of the wealth of the world was originally purchased. And I think this is a really important point when we're talking about, you know, what the future of money is going to be, because it's not actually the characteristic of the money itself that is the be-all and end-all. You know, the main important feature of money is how honest it is, how able it is for it to not be corrupted. And we can see from the past that, you know, gold and silver has been corrupted, and so if we were to be in a situation when we needed a new currency in the future, that's not necessarily the solution, because history has shown that it's been taken advantage of in the past, and we don't actually want that again. And so the other thing that Adam Smith that was keen to comment on was prices. You know, prices help to give us an indication of competition in the market, you know, which businesses are being successful, you know, what do people want, what are they not so eager to have. You know, if things are scarce in the market, it tends to be more expensive. If things are too abundant in the market, then it tends to be less expensive. And in a situation where those prices start to be distorted, or if you have a monopoly in the market who is holding goods back in order to try and make the goods more expensive, what it means is that the stuff that's held back isn't going into the market, and this, of course, means that the economy starts to become uneconomical and wasteful. Not only that, you know, once you start to distort things like price, all of the other economic calculations that you are trying to make become nonsense, because the basic data that you're using in order to make those calculations has already been corrupted, and so actually it becomes more and more difficult to make accurate predictions going forward. And so all of these issues kind of interconnect in a big wheel. So we've got trading, we've got markets, we've got labour, and we've got prices. And all of them depend on what Adam Smith called the great wheel of circulation. In order for all of this to function appropriately, this needs to be correct. And when you break it, everything else goes wrong. So it's really, really important. And so clearly, you know, Adam Smith was onto something, and, you know, towards the latter part of the 19th century, in the 1800s, you know, Britain and most of Europe was experiencing incredible prosperity, and this was because we've reached a stage where the gold standard was trustworthy, it was possible to hold the banks to account, and this was when we saw the Industrial Revolution, and huge prosperity was seen throughout Europe as a result of this. But what actually happened was in World War I, when they started to fight that war and they were running out of money, they tried to issue bonds in order to raise more money with the public, but apparently only a third of them were actually bought. And so in order to come up with the extra 2/3, a small group of bankers and the government came up with a plan that they would temporarily suspend the tie between the gold in the bank and the amount of currency that was being issued to the population, and in this way they would create additional currency in order to continue to pay for World War I. And so this was the reason why World War I was so devastating. You know, if they'd been limited to how much the public were willing to pay, there would have been a point at which they couldn't continue on. But by using this accounting trick, this of course made it possible. Not only that, as they came up with this agreement, they decided that the plan would be that whoever lost the war would be responsible for paying the reparations in order to get Europe back onto the gold standard. And of course, we've all heard that it was Germany who were landed with those reparations, and of course that led to the hyperinflation of Weimar Germany and ultimately the rise of Hitler. And I always wondered, you know, where did these reparations come from? We're always told that bit in school, but what we're not told about is the trick that took place initially in order for that consequence, and how devastating that was for the rest of us. And so although Europe had been prosperous towards the late 1900s, there were other countries where their currencies were already breaking down. And in 1917, one of these was Russia. And of course, at the time, the working population were persuaded that actually it was the rich people who were at fault, and they had a much better plan. You know, why don't we confiscate the private property of everybody, and then the government be responsible for redistributing it? And the poor workers fell for this plan, but it was the trick, because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you understand economics, without property rights, we lose the ability to save. So by the workers agreeing to allow their assets and the assets of the rich to be confiscated in order to redistribute evenly, they lost this ability, because saving is actually the only opportunity workers have to get ahead. And so, as a result of all of this, I'm not going to give you all a history lesson. I'm sure you've learned a lot of these issues in school. I just wanted to point out some of the interesting facts that seem to have been left out of our education. But ultimately in the West, we've now reached the stage where we have this uneasy balance between what we think of as a free market, in that we are still allowed to own private property and we're allowed to buy and sell from each other. But on the other hand, we've also got this issue of central planning, where the governments want a portion of what we earn and they are going to be able to redistribute it. And I have to say, I think, you know, a lot of us are getting pretty disillusioned with how that plan is working out and how they are managing the economy. And of course, the problem with central planning is not whether or not you have a plan or you don't have a plan. The real issue is, well, whose plan are we actually following? And if one person has a plan and there's a whole group of people who don't agree with it and want a different plan, then whose plan wins? You know, the idea of democracy is that we're able to challenge these plans if we don't like it, but of course, even with so-called democracy, we're finding it harder and harder to actually push back against these plans that are being imposed on us. And the other problem with kind of having this uneasy balance is it's not really one thing or the other. And so in order to try and keep everyone happy, it becomes very costly. And because, you know, we now have a fiat currency system, you know, that began when we were first taken off the gold standard as a result of World War I. You know, most of the 20th century, you know, happened to be about, you know, how that was managed and trying to get back onto the gold standard. And as you know, we've never actually managed it. You know, the best example of this is the US. You know, at the moment, the US dollar is seen as the world reserve currency. But, you know, just in the last 2 years, they've added, you know, another 7 trillion to their debt. Just in the last 2 years, they've added another 7 trillion to their debt, when actually initially it took 215 years to reach 7 trillion. You know, this graph is now growing exponentially. And of course, most of the time it's hidden from us on the ground because, you know, part of their agenda is to keep prices stable so that we don't go, hang on a minute, you know, what's going on here and what we can do about it. And so, you know, in the past they've been able to manage that. But as we can see, you know, with petrol prices starting to go up and food prices starting to go up in the economy, they're starting to lose the ability to keep a grip on this, which is actually very concerning. Now, $1 trillion is actually an awful lot of money. I mean, I have to say, you know, I can vaguely imagine what $1 million might be like, possibly $1 billion. But $1 trillion, you know, what does that even look like? And so in these presentations, what I like to do is give people a little animation so that they can see and get a feel for exactly what $1 trillion looks like. So this is a $100 note that's now been bundled into $10,000. This is what $1 million looks like in $100 notes. This is what $1 billion look like. But actually the jump from $1 billion to $1 trillion is absolutely staggering. Pallets of $1 billion notes stacked on an airport runway. And if you stack them all on top of each other, you know, each $1 trillion is almost as large as a skyscraper. And this animation is from 2017. And you can see at that point, US debt stood at 20 trillion. But when I checked the US debt clock just yesterday, it was already at 30 trillion. So we've got $10 trillion just in the space of 5 years. absolutely frightening. And this is the US. You know, around the rest of the world, I believe the total at the moment is something like 400 trillion of global debt. Now, because most of this is hidden from us, we don't actually, you know, we're not consciously aware of it. It's not something that's discussed in media. But the truth is, you know, one person's debt is someone else's asset. You know, the fact that someone has lent this debt to someone means that interest is owed on all of this debt. And so even a slight increase in interest rates makes the cost of servicing that debt absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I remember as a child my father being physically sick in the 80s when they'd just bought their family home and the interest rates were starting to increase rapidly. It can be devastating if it's not something that you plan for or you've got the resources to cover. And, you know, this kind of paper money, you know, throughout history, it's been shown to be a failure. You know, ancient Rome collapsed as a result of fiat money. These are the French assignats, which I explained earlier, led to the French Revolution. And of course, we've also got the hyperinflation of Weimar Germany. You know, and sadly, it would seem that the West is possibly going the same way. It's just that the signals aren't as obvious in the economy until it's literally almost too late. And so how have people got out of these situations in the past? Well, of course, with Weimar Germany, anyone who knew what was going on, they kind of flocked to gold. And you can see this chart of gold against the German mark going absolutely exponential, a little bit like the graph of the US dollar debt looks at the moment. But of course, what we have to remember in 1920 is there were still people around who remembered the prosperity of Europe. And so for them, it was obvious to run to gold. In more recent history, when there have been hyperinflations in Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and Romania, they've actually flocked to the US dollar because that was seen as the world reserve currency, and so that was what they trusted and was available to them. But of course, if the US dollar is starting to collapse, where do we go then? And so this is the big question. And if I take you back to Adam Smith, you know, ultimately, a prosperous country and prosperous individuals and prosperous trade all boils down to property rights. And of course, this has been reflected as we've been through these different phases of money throughout history. So with the gold standard, property rights were granted and withdrawn by the king. You know, when Norman the Conqueror invaded England, you know, the prize to all of his friends was to make them, you know, lords of the realm. And of course, so that property right was granted by the king, and if you fell out of favour with the king, it was taken away from you. It was also seen with Henry VIII with the dissolution of the monasteries. You know, he argued to the public that the Catholic Church was corrupt, and so this is what justified his actions. But ultimately, he was the one who benefited in terms of the wealth once he invaded them and captured them all. Currently, right now, we've got the Fiat standard, where property rights are actually granted and withdrawn by the government. So, you know, if you buy a house, you get a freehold license from the government in order to hold your house, but by the same token, they will also give you a bill for council tax that you have no way of getting out of, and so one kind of comes with the other, and that's just one example. Not only that, we've currently got a narrative of you'll own nothing and be happy from the World Economic Forum. You know, is it possible that these are our central planners behind the scenes? And actually, when it comes down to trade and prosperity and property rights, as you will see from what I've explained, the idea of you will own nothing and be happy is the most utterly ludicrous statement you could ever possibly make. The only people who are happy in this situation are the ones who then own everything that you have to rent them off. But fortunately, we now have the opportunity of the Bitcoin standard, property rights that are granted and withdrawn by the sovereign individual. And so ultimately, it will be the brightest and the smartest, those who know how to protect their property as a digital asset. The software of Bitcoin has given us the ability to do this. Who will be the ones who will be in a position to trade honestly with others, which will secure their reputations and help them to prosper in a way that others possibly won't be able to. You know, with the software of Bitcoin, you know, we now have the potential for a form of money where it is very difficult to remove it from you using violence. It's almost impossible to steal it from you using fraud. And so going back to Adam Smith, we now have the opportunity to restore the integrity of the great wheel of circulation. It is therefore not incumbent upon us to petition the governments in order to take more from the wealthy in order to give more to the poor. Instead, our mission with Bitcoin is to give power to the sovereign individual, and in this way, my friends, we will truly be creating a better world. And so, just to finish, when I first started going to these conferences, I was collecting a number of ideas, and and one morning I just woke up and wrote this poem, and I liked it so much, I put it to words and music. And so, as an element of additional entertainment, I'm going to share it with you today, and then I'll share a bit more of my information with you, and we'll go to questions. Okay, so here we go.
Satoshi's page. They call me Cassandra. Some say that's my name, because those that surround me can't handle the blame. The economy is flailing. You'd think they'd be scared, but when all's said and done, the problem's not theirs. Teachers in schools wash the children's clothes. Breakfast they give, pizza and toast. Round and round the impoverished go. To the minds of the rich, the realisation is slow. In the comfort of homes, I'm all right, Jack. Whilst depression is looming and laughs, I'll be right back. The comfort of those who can't see past their nose. Oh, heaven help them, but that's how it goes. Time it is ticking, it now won't be long. Wile E. Coyote can't tell the cliff has gone. Don't say you weren't warned before all this is done. You thought they were crazy, but the Bitcoin has won. When it is all over and the truth it is told, the story of crisis, it never gets old. The elites in their castles, their fortunes to fold. Economists and politicians left out in the cold. A new world is rising, paper is no more. Money has died, and so has the law. Decay and corruption that went to its core. The blockchain has spoken, no truth like it before. The rules of the software, release or a new game. What will we choose at the dawn of a new age? A potential to trap, trumped by Satoshi's page. A triumph as the devil nurses his rage. So history goes, and what will it bring? A fairer society, or form of new king? A new set of rules around us to ring, but with many more choices, a new song it will sing. Our future is fluid, no need to be scared, but rules then and now will needs be compared. A time for philosophy and careful thought. We still have volition, our future's not bought. Softly, softly, tread carefully, now wait. There's no going back once you open the gate. By all means look back, but in truth it's too late. The dollar Fiat Ponzi scheme has sealed all of our fates. Step into the future as boldly as you can. The wisdom of the past needs to inform your plan. The old energies are changing, the negativity is done. Kindness and compassion and creativity have won. It may still seem dark, the new light only a spark, but trust me, it's coming, this ride in the park. We are here to create it, the world we were promised. Every soul on the earth now has the opportunity to comment. The domain of the world no longer ruled by the few. The power we have, if only you knew. Released from their shackles, humans are free to create everything as it was always meant to be. But careful here, for surely you know the evil within you has potential to show. So be mindful and careful, but also carefree. The truth you have known, and so it shall be. For love is the energy leading us on to the true potential we were always meant to become.
information about me, I have a website, satoshispage.com, various social media profiles. I've also got a newsletter if anyone's interested in signing up to that. As we mentioned earlier, there's also the book. It's available on Amazon. That's the QR code for it. And like I said, we're going to be providing hard copies with a signature later if anyone's interested in that. And so there we are. Any questions?
Don't be shy, ask the questions.
Yep.
Can I connect you with Consensus Network instead of having to sell your book on Amazon? You can sell it through Consensus Network.
Sounds brilliant.
Or
Yeah.
Bitcoin, two Bitcoins, so we can get away from Amazon.
Yes, of course. I'd love to. Yeah, great stuff.
Question.
Yeah.
As a former dentist,
Yeah.
have you spoken to any dentists in the trade to see if they're interested in Consensus Bitcoin?
I have actually. There's a chap called James Martin who actually runs a Facebook group called Dentists Who Invest, and he's got a program called Access to Bitcoin, and so he teaches dentists how to invest, and one of the things he tends to promote is cryptocurrencies. Sadly, cryptocurrencies, not just Bitcoin, but I've been on his podcast a couple of times, and he's starting to get the hang of exactly how Bitcoin works. But certainly, I've been asked a couple of times about dentists who want to accept Bitcoin in their practices, and those that ask, I offer private consultations for, and I'm helping them with that. So yeah, I have had a few queries. Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. It's hard when you watch the price crash so heavily to wonder what all the hype is about. And of course, in the media, they're always telling you that Bitcoin is about to die. But of course, the economics is one aspect of Bitcoin. Understanding the software is another thing. And because of the way the software works with the halving and how that influences the miners when the price starts to go down. Also, there are huge attempts to try and financialize Bitcoin at the moment. People want to kind of fit it into the paradigm of how it already exists. And of course, so these are some of the fights that Bitcoin has that they need to overcome. And of course, that's going to take time. People really need to understand what this is all about, what the essence of what it is we're trying to achieve here. We're not hardcore Bitcoiners because we expect the price to go, to 100 grand tomorrow, in spite of, what you might read on Twitter. But it's a longer battle, and the arguments are much more fundamental than what's going on with the price. But of course, that doesn't really provide clickbait on a lot of these social media channels. And so, in order to drive interest, everyone wants to focus on the price. But then, of course, when the price starts to plummet, everyone gets really disappointed, and they throw the baby out with the bathwater without actually realizing what it is throwing away. But fortunately, I think because of the way in which Bitcoin has been designed and programmed, it's mathematically inevitable. The only question is really, how long is it going to take? As you can see from what I've demonstrated today, the world's financial system is in serious trouble. And the outlets that we've run to in the past, like gold and the US dollar, are no longer really ultimate solutions. Some people will try and persuade you that it's gold, but of course, running to gold just gives us the other problems that we've had in the past, which led to fiat money in the first place. And so really, I think the essential message is the fact that, self-sovereignty is the key to everything. It's the key to being a prosperous individual, it's the key to having prosperous communities, and it's the key to having prosperous countries and a prosperous world. And really, that's the key message, which I don't think often gets through as much as we would like, because it's a difficult thing to explain. Nice, yeah?
When you were in your dental practice and still got a Fiat mindset,
Yeah.
and then switched to the Bitcoin mindset,
Yeah.
what do you look back on now and see as like some of the standout scams or poor incentive procedures that dentists still practice today? And you think need to stop?
Wow, that's a whole other topic. There are a lot of problems in dentistry. There's a whole lot of problems in the medical system and the NHS altogether, which is a big part of, you know, what I mentioned at the beginning, you know, this balance between NHS and private, and, you know, the problems you come across when you try and socialise a number of these things. You know, it destroys the free market. You know, you've got central planners who aren't necessarily making decisions for the best reasons, and it's created a whole host of problems. And because I'd spent 20 years as a dentist, I'd actually reached the point where I was starting to learn what some of those problems are, because actually a lot of them are quite hidden. You know, it takes a lot of research and understanding to realise where some of the distortions are. And so I would learn some of these things and then tell my colleagues about them, and they didn't believe me because they're so busy and they're so filled with other things going on, they just don't have time to think about it. And of course, if I'm right, it completely disrupts everything that they're doing. And people just don't have the energy and the resources to do that. They've got busy lives, they're running on a hamster wheel to keep their life going, they've got to a situation where they've got a big house, a big car, and their kids in private school. You know, undoing all of that to kind of start again, it's just horrifying. You know, it's hard for them to even begin to think about it. And so yes, there are huge problems in dentistry, but what I realised was I wasn't going to be able to do anything about them until this was fixed, which is why I've now decided to focus my energy here instead of dentistry. Any others? What's my most favourite? Well, I mean, it's just genius invention, isn't it? I mean, it's the most brilliant thing, I think, that's ever been invented, you know, considering the period we are in history. And I think what's really interesting is if it had been introduced 20 years earlier, it probably would have died because it wasn't so needed. I think a big part of the problem, a big part of the benefit is when it was actually introduced, you know, it arrived just after the financial crisis where people really started to wake up to what was actually going on. And so it was it was introduced at the perfect time. And actually, because of the way in which it's designed and because it's so different to what anyone's actually experienced before, you actually need quite a lot of education to understand why it's so special. You know, if you just come at it superficially, you're just looking at the price, or, you know, just looking at the fact that it's got fancy technology, and it doesn't tell you the whole story. And actually, without understanding the problems, you don't understand why it's the solution. And so it requires research. You know, you need to learn about why the financial system is so bad to understand, you know, why everyone's making crazy profits from this thing. You know, because the people who have made crazy profits, they absolutely deserve it. You know, they invested the money and helped support the network when it was in its early stages. Without that early investment, you know, Bitcoin wouldn't be what it is today. You know, it's enthusiastic people like you learning about it, investing in it, you know, trying to learn about the technology, trying to ensure that it's decentralized. You know, the education and the understanding is just key to people getting involved and enabling this thing to survive. So I think the fact that it was invented at all, the way in which it was invented, you know, it's also invented in such a way that the people who are greedy, who just want to make money from it, are constantly surprised when it suddenly takes a deep dive. So the people who are in it for the wrong reasons will often be floored by it. And so what that means is gradually over time, the network has an opportunity to become bigger, it becomes more decentralized, and the sovereign individuals who, you know, have bought it because they want to create a better world have a better chance of winning the battle. And so I think those are all the great things about it. I think what's really disappointing about it is observing, you know, different people's attitudes to it, the attempt to financialize it, the attempt to try and use cryptocurrencies to try and recreate what we've had in the past, you know, basically central planned cryptocurrencies. I mean, seriously, you know, what are you people trying to do to us? So, you know, and of course that's all due to misunderstanding, people not having a full understanding of what it is that, you know, is actually trying to be achieved here, because everyone who diverts their resources and their attention in that direction are missing the point, because, you know, nothing else is going to, it's going to be very, very difficult to surpass everything that Bitcoin offers. But, you know, I believe that ultimately people will be driven to it as a result of their own self-interest. You know, as people say, you know, they come for the money, you stay for the philosophy, or whatever it is, however the saying goes. And so, you know, I think eventually we will win the battle. I think it's, as I say, a mathematical certainty. It's just a matter of time and whether or not we can get there before everyone else figures out, who wants to keep the old system, figures out what's actually going on. Anyone else?
people aren't educated.
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, central bank digital currencies are definitely going to be a new battleground. I mean, it amazes me that people are so keen to get the government to try and regulate cryptocurrencies. You know, they argue this because they say, you know, big business aren't going to be able to get involved and actually invest in order to increase the price unless we sort out regulation. But it's almost like, guys, if you've not been listening, you know, Bitcoin regulates the governments. You know, with Bitcoin, governments, if not exist, but they're certainly a lot smaller than they have, they lose their power to do some of the corrupt things that they are already doing. You know, and it gives people the power back to question, you know, what government is actually doing with their money. You know, the next time they try and issue bonds for a world war, and the only way they can pay for it is Bitcoin, you know, you're going to have a whole host of people going, hang on a minute, we don't want this, we're not going to pay for it. And what can they do? They're not in a situation where they can actually create a currency anymore unless they can persuade us all to go with their central bank digital currencies. And of course, so this is why education is so important. You know, what will happen is it will get to the stage where we do reach a financial crisis and they go, here you go guys, I mean they're doing it already. I mean, Rishi Sunak's already issued a video saying that, you know, we're trying to develop our central bank digital currency because it's the way in which they keep control of the system. And a number of people buy it because people have become so dislocated and uneducated as to how money actually works. You know, greatly to their favour, but certainly to our disadvantage. But sadly, I think a lot of people will be fooled by it. But, you know, for as long as Bitcoin exists, I think they'll only win the argument for so long. Eventually, you know, if they hold it and they can see that if they're talking to Bitcoin, they'll be able to buy it more, eventually they'll figure it out. But of course, they lose a lot along the way. You know, the ones who figure it out first and get the idea first will be the ones who benefit from it. But, you know, there'll be a number of battles and it will look scary for a while, I think.
Wow, what about that? Give her another round of applause. You see, here's the thing. If any of you are like me, I can take all that in here, but sometimes I can't articulate it out of here. So just